Lake Titicaca, 14,000 feet above sea level, on the Bolivian side near Copacabana. I was there on holiday, and as usual, I had a camera because, well, I always have a camera. And I saw this man on a papyrus boat. He was punting it along not too far offshore. The mountains were in the background, the light catching the water, catching the edge of the boat himself. And it just created this really ancient scene. Here's this woven thing that looked like it had floated straight out of another century, and I loved it. It was one of those images that just simply presented itself in front of me, perfect, complete. I didn't have to give it a second thought. I just raised my camera and started shooting frame after frame. It was a cool image because it was beautiful. It was cool. It was there. A cool image that just dropped on my lap, and I'm a photographer, and that's what photographers do. So then he saw me, the guy on the boat, and he went from calm to fury in about 3 seconds. 0 to 100, like a switch had been thrown. And I asked my guide that was with me, what I'd done, and he told me that the local people believe that when you photograph them, you're stealing a part of their soul. So I lowered my camera, but the frames were already shot. And here's the thing I've always kept in my awareness ever since. See, from my perspective, it was harmless. It was a cool shoot. From his perspective, I just walked up to the edge of his world and taken something he hadn't agreed to. Neither of us were wrong about what happened, but only one of us had a camera. That's what this video is about. The boundary, where it is, why most photographers cross it without ever even noticing, and why the profession spent 100 years teaching us the wrong story about what happens when we do. There's a line between photographing someone and taking something from them. And every photographer knows it exists, yet nobody can tell you where it is. And the profession assigned exactly the wrong vocabulary for it. Candid, street, stolen moment. We have a ton of euphemisms for what we do, and not one of them includes the word consent. Now, here's the thing about euphemisms. They don't protect the subject, they protect the photographer. They let you frame something as technique that was actually just taking. Robert Doisneau, one of the French giants of French street photography, he spent 4 decades with his most famous image sold as a candid capture, the kiss outside the Paris City Hall. Generations of photography students studied it as the standard of a stolen moment. The photographer as an invisible witness of the world unaware. That image was staged, 2 hired actors. The revelation only came out in the early 90s because a couple who actually believed they were the subject sued him for using their image without permission. And the weird irony to the story is the lawsuit that exposed the fraud was filed by people who weren't even in the photograph. See, the real subjects had been paid. The public had been lied to. And the only reason anyone found out was that 2 strangers looked at the image and saw themselves. Now, Karsh did something different. In 1941, he photographed Churchill after he had just addressed the Canadian Parliament. And Karsh had exactly 2 minutes to make the portrait that would become known as the Roaring Lion. And in that shoot, Churchill refused to put his cigar down. So Karsh walked up and just said, "Forgive me, sir," and snatched it out of his mouth. The resulting expression, the defiant, wounded fury, that's the photograph the world remembers. And here's the important part. Karsh asked. Karsh got consent. And he got it by provoking the subject into a reaction the subject didn't choose to give. It's a harder case, sitting somewhere between permission and theft. It's more like manipulation dressed as portraiture, and we call it genius because the result was really, really good. So the boundary is real, and the profession has spent 100 years pretending it's a creative choice rather than an ethical one. Right? Every portrait session has a moment where something shifts. Every piece of street work, every documentary shoot, every time you point a lens at another human being, you cross a boundary. No one drew it for you. No one's going to fine you for crossing it. On one side, you're photographing a person. On the other side, you're using them. The industry has plenty of paperwork for the obvious version. Model releases, editorial ethics, press standards, a whole legal toolkit built to protect everyone from everyone else. None of it covers the version that actually affects people, the one that happens before any contract exists. It's the quiet, the unspoken deal about whose reality this photo is going to serve. A deal that nobody involved agreed to because nobody involved actually knew it was being made. So here's what it looks like in practice. I tune the light until it finds the vulnerability that I had decided was already there. I wait, or I nudge, until they give me the expression that proves the story I walked in with. They never auditioned for vulnerable. I cast them in the role before they even arrived. 300 captures, one true story chosen. Every session produces a dozen honest versions of a person. And then I pick the one that suits me, and I call it the shot. They don't get a vote, they get a caption. The barista, the busker, the old man on the bench becomes a stand-in for whatever my feed is short of this month, whether it's grit, wisdom, authenticity. He's wearing my story like a costume he never agreed to put on. So they're all different mechanics, but they all have the same outcome. The instant a person becomes a vessel for your story, the camera starts recording them, and it starts recording you with a face attached. Now here's a perspective that's so often missed, and I don't believe that's an accident. Every corner of photographic education, whether it be art school, workshops, the algorithm feeding you your 40th Find Your Style video this month teaches the opposite. Develop your voice, find your style, make the image say something, be assertive with your vision. Translated, the subject is raw material. You're the author, they're the ink. This is nothing new, right? Karsh snatching the cigar out of Churchill's mouth seconds before the shutter, the scowl that became the roaring lion, Arbus's confrontational intimacy, Avedon stripping the background down to nothing. Each one imposed a framework on the person in front of them, and each one produced work that's still being taught 80 years later. And I'm not here to argue with that. But that tradition, run through social media, through the ego economy of photography culture, through an algorithm that rewards striking over true, has mutated into something the masses wouldn't recognize. Photographers who treat every stranger as a content opportunity, the subject evaporates, and what's left is the photographer's performance of having seen something profound. The images that win online are almost always built this way. Dramatic light, arresting composition, a decisive moment, all manufactured rather than witnessed. The industry keeps handing out gold stars for the manufacturing. They'll teach you to find your voice for the price of a workshop. Nobody's selling the course on what the voice does to the person who lent you their face. Go to any photography workshop today and count how many times you hear the word consent. Now count how many times you hear aperture, bokeh, focal length. You'll run out of fingers on the first one before you finished your coffee. See, the profession has spent 50 years teaching technique and 0 years teaching ethics. And the result is a generation of photographers who can tell you exactly how to expose for backlit skin tones, but can't tell you why it's so important that the person attached to the skin did or didn't agree to be in your portfolio. It's what the culture teaches. The camera as weapon, the photographer as hunter, the subject as prey. We don't say it that way. We'd never say it that way. But the language gives us away every time. Right? I shot her. I captured the moment. I took the portrait. Shot, captured, took. Not one of those words implies a transaction between equals. Now, the commercial world has a clarity personal photography never bothers to build. Everyone in the room knows the deal. Right? The model is there to serve the client's objective, not to express their own style or to be seen on their own terms. The photographer delivers the client's vision. The art director knows exactly what the client expects. The contract is explicit, and consent is built into the structure before anyone picks up a camera. And that clarity makes violations very easy to spot. One of the shoots I did, I was shooting a series of watch cases. They were fairly large for the manufacturer. And he decided on the day of the shoot that he wanted girls in bikinis beside the cases. And that wasn't what was discussed in the original direction. The models who were booked hadn't agreed to that. They were there for scale in business attire. So I literally kicked him out of the studio before we even finished setting up the shoot. It happens in other ways too. It always amazes me just how many people show up out of nowhere when there's a bikini shoot and decide to come and watch. The models have consented to the shoot. The photographer, the direction, the client, they have not consented to an audience. And it was always out. The commercial world taught me to see the contract and to protect it. Personal photography has no contract. Portrait work, street work, documentary, nobody signs anything, nobody gets paid. The model release, if one even exists, covers the legal territory and says nothing about the invisible one, which is exactly where the violation lives. The person you photograph for what they represent to you, for the story you've already decided to tell never consented to any of that. You decide the creative direction. Most of the time you just forgot to mention it to them. That's the real difference. Commercial work builds consent into the structure. Personal photography leaves you to build it yourself, and most photographers never notice the job was theirs to do. So here's the convenient lie, and I'm sure you've heard it. You may even have said it. I know I have. Right? Awareness kills authenticity. The argument goes something like this. If the subject knows they're being photographed, they'll perform, they'll pose, they'll give you the version of themselves they want you to see instead of the version that's actually there. So you don't ask, you just capture, take, because the taking feels more true. In reality, that is the most elegant piece of self-deception the profession ever produced. What it actually means is, I'd rather skip the hard work of earning a real moment than risk losing the easy one I can just steal. It's laziness dressed up pretending to be philosophy. It has nothing to do with authenticity. It has never been about authenticity. It's all about the photographer's comfort. Here's what I learned eventually, painfully, over 40 years of doing this for a living. A subject who feels safe stops performing. Whether or not they know the camera is there, it's irrelevant. The performance isn't caused by awareness. The performance is caused by fear. And consent, real consent, earned consent, is what removes the fear. I've shot commercial campaigns where the subject knew exactly where every light was, exactly what lens I was using, exactly when I was going to fire. And they gave me moments so unguarded the client thought I'd hidden the camera, because they trusted me. And I'd done the work before the shutter ever opened. So here's the structure I'd like to leave with you. It's the most useful lens I have for what actually happens between a photographer and a subject. There are two ways to be in front of a person while you're holding a camera. You can be a channel, where you're open, spacious, present, technically ready, and not reaching. You're not steering the scene toward an outcome that you decided in the car on the way over. The subject exists on their own terms. Something true is already happening in front of you, and your only job is to be ready when it surfaces. Just to be there and ready when it shows up. Or you can show up as a funnel. You take what's actually there and you narrow it, you translate it, you run it through your discomfort, your concept, your aesthetic checklist. The person gets compressed into something more manageable, more usable, more on brand for whatever you're building. Now, most interference is just funneling with good manners. And I believe nobody means harm. You're running what someone else is expressing through your own interpretation machine. And somewhere in that machine, the vast becomes a familiar. Here's the test that I actually like to apply. Mid-shoot, I ask myself, does this image tell me about them or about me? If the honest answer is me, well, congratulations. I've built a funnel, and it has my name on the side of it. Run the test on your own library and be honest about what you find. I did this exercise 5 years ago, and I had to sit down for about 20 minutes afterwards. You think you're a channel. Everyone thinks they're a channel. The evidence, the actual photographs, tell a different story. So here's the tougher test. Sometimes the urge to adjust, to improve, to refine, to direct is just you flinching at what's actually in front of you. The subject's actual expression might be inconvenient. It may not be beautiful in the way that you had storyboarded it. It may refuse to confirm the story that you drove over to tell. The courage is in staying, keeping the camera up, not fixing what is in front of you. Instead, actually sitting with what's in front of you, even when it's uncooperative and doesn't match the mood board. The flinch is the line, and most of us have trained ourselves to ignore it. The commercial world trained us out of necessity. Nobody was paying me to decide the client's product looked better a different way. I witnessed what was there and delivered that. Do it enough times and it rewires something in your eye, the ability to see the subject instead of your idea of the subject. So one of the things I had to learn was to stop imposing and start witnessing. And something shows up in the frame that wasn't there a second ago. The actual person. Their actual face, not the performance of it. Their actual light, not the vulnerability I engineered on a timer. Subjects feel the difference in their bodies before they can identify with it. In a channel session, something in them unclenches, relaxes. They stop performing and something real gets a chance to surface. And when it does surface, I just have to be there to catch it. In a funneled session, they feel the ask. Even if you never said it, they comply. They hand you the expression you were fishing for. The image comes out, technically flawless, and quietly false. And anyone who looks at it senses that without knowing why. The best portrait photographers are space holders. They don't manufacture truth. They make the room safe enough that the subject stops performing, and then they wait. Your presence is the offering. Your restraint is the craft. The frame you couldn't have planned is almost always the best one. So, is the one you nearly didn't take because it wasn't what you came for? That man on Lake Titicaca, I still have the transparencies somewhere. I've never published or used the images because every time I look at it, it reminds me of a situation where I'd taken something from someone who didn't consent. At the time, I told myself, it was fine, but it wasn't fine. Because from his perspective, I had reached across a boundary I didn't even know existed and taken something I had no right to take. And the fact that I didn't know the boundary was there doesn't make the taking any less real. Love never overrides. It only ever offers. That line changed how I hold the camera. When I'm in front of a person, with a camera or without one, my job is not to fix them, improve them, complete them, or tell their story for them. My job is to be present enough that if something true wants to happen, there's space for it. To witness without interfering. To stay open instead of funneling. To offer the frame and let them decide what to put in it. The images that come from that place are different. I can't fully explain why. I know it when I see it, and you know it when you see it. Just a photographer, present enough to catch the truth as it surfaces. That is the skill nobody teaches. That is the craft worth learning. Next time you photograph a stranger, run the test before you post it. Does this image tell you about them or about me, you? Tell me what you find in the comments. I read every one and I'll pull the honest answers into the next video. Thank you.